When you saw Lor'themar in the cinematic, did you just think, hang on, is this another Horde leader that's going to die very shortly? I kinda did as well, and that's why this video exists. So, this is Grom Hellscream. He's Garrosh's father, he's the first war chief of the modern Horde, and you might not know who he is, and even if you do, you may not realize that he's the reason why Blizzard loves killing Horde leaders. Seriously though, let me explain. Orcs were first introduced as bloodthirsty maniacs. Thrall then reformed the orcs into what we know today. But there was only so much he could do because the orcs were quite literally cursed. They were corrupted by this guy, Manaroth, a pit lord of the Burning Legion. Drinking his blood turned them into the green berserkers that we saw in Warcraft 1 and Warcraft 2. But by the end of Warcraft 3's Orc campaign, Thrall and Grom cornered Manaroth in Felwood. But they weren't enough, so Grom did what had to be done. He sacrificed himself, killing Manaroth and setting the orcs free. And it's that noble sacrifice that redeemed the orcs and gave the Horde a fighting chance for a real civilization on Azeroth. It was an epic narrative moment. It solidified the fact that when their backs are up against the wall, that Horde leaders would die for the greater good. And they kept on doing that. Karn Bloodhoof, Vol'jin, Saurfang. But then you look at others, and you find their stories are similar. Garrosh living up to Grom's legacy, sacrificing everything for what he thought was right. Kel'Thas, the prince of the Blood Elves, trying to save his people, only to go mad. The Horde is driven by this story of noble sacrifice, but by now, it's happened so many times that Blizzard begins to look more like an executioner with a line of headless bodies behind it. So today, we're going to dive into why Blizzard loves killing Horde leaders. Maybe we'll have a think about poor Lor'themar, whether he'll make it out of this expansion alive. But there's something you should know. This is Xal'atath's complete story. It's 37 minutes of pure lore. It's a mammoth video that'll help you enjoy Midnight. We put a full week of editing into this, we shot custom scenes, and Bellular.games members can watch it right now. Your support lets us craft big, deep dive videos like this without sacrificing our other content. So thank you, and I know all the other viewers thank you as well. You can check it out in the link below or catch it public when it goes live next week. The first leader to die was an orc who was murdered by another orc, and it's a story you may not know. Blackhand was war chief of a bloodthirsty horde controlled by Gul'dan's Shadow Council. To be clear, this is not the Gul'dan you will know from Warlords of Draenor. This is the original Gul'dan. Now, his second in command, Orgrim Doomhammer, was mostly on board with invading Azeroth, but he thought Blackhand was a traitor that sold the orcs essentially into slavery. So he challenged Blackhand to Mak-Garah, essentially ritual one-on-one combat, and killed him. A wise move for a happier horde. He then went on to kill every warlock in the Shadow Council. Even with that, the horde wasn't saved. They were conquering Azeroth for a reason. They wanted resources. So Orgrim destroyed Stormwind. He invaded Lordaeron and nearly wiped humanity from the face of the planet. But unfortunately for the orcs, a betrayal would happen. Gul'dan cared a lot about personal power, and he went off on a fool's errand, taking forces with him. This split the horde, giving the Alliance enough momentum to push Orgrim's horde all the way to Blackrock Spire, so way from the north of the continent where they had actually conquered, all the way back near the Dark Portal. And in the conflict there, Orgrim killed Anduin Lothar, major leader of the humans, but he was then defeated by Turalyon. Yes, Turalyon, as you see in World of Warcraft today. Orgrim was captured, but managed to escape, and he fled to the Alterac Mountains. That's where he met Thrall, who, along with other orcs, were stuck in internment camps. He then gave Thrall his armor and the Doomhammer, and then granted upon him the title of War Chief of the new horde. Orgrim finally died from an Alliance lance to the back whilst trying to save orcs from the Lordaeron internment camps. Orgrim wasn't a good guy in a plain way, but he killed Blackhand because Blackhand was driving the horde into the ground, and ultimately he did sacrifice himself to save his people. He did die for what he thought was a greater good, and he passed the torch on to someone who he thought could take the horde to a better place. And now, we're going to see how that story would repeat over and over and over again. Many years later, and after meeting loads of original orcs from Draenor, well, Garrosh, one of those orcs, was made war chief by Thrall, and he was made war chief exactly because of his father's legacy. You see, Grom was his father. Grom was war chief, and Thrall felt that he had somewhat earned it. It was supposed to be a symbolic thing. Who better to next lead the orcs than the son of one of their greatest heroes? And that meant that when Thrall first discovered Grom's son on Draenor, he started shaping him into the future war chief. He even gave him his father's axe, Gorehal. Now, during Wrath of the Lich King, we saw Garrosh was a little unhinged, but after the elemental unrest and Deathwing, Thrall wanted to retire. He wanted to tend to the world, to re-engage with shamanism, and so he made Garrosh war chief. And this is where the first major character of the modern Horde dies. Khārn Bloodhoof. The Tauren had been with Thrall since the Barons, all the way back in Warcraft 3, and they were now a backbone of the Horde. And if anything, they were more noble, and Khārn did not like the way the Horde was going. So, after a string of questionable decisions, one of which led to the murder of Tauren druids by Garrosh's goons, Khārn had enough, and he challenged Garrosh to Mak-Garah. That's again the orcish tradition of ritual combat, a way to sort out differences of opinion. But it was also a way to challenge someone's leadership. Now, it could be done to who draws first blood, but Khārn insisted that this one would be to the death, and Garrosh agreed. At first, Khārn was throwing down, absolutely bullying the younger orc, but Garrosh's weapon was covered in Grim Totem poison, the Grim Totems being a, let's say, agitator group, tribe of Tauren. And so, after a small wound from Gorehal, Khārn was paralyzed, and that allowed Garrosh to quickly land a killing blow, taking out the first Horde leader. Now, I said Khārn was the first to die, but that's not strictly true. It was actually Kel'Thas Sunstrider, but his is a more complicated story. It's not exactly like the others. In Warcraft, elves are framed as a dying race. The Night Elves have fallen from their empire. The Blood Elves named themselves after all the blood Arthas spilt invading Silvermoon. And after the destruction of the Sunwell, Kael brought the best and brightest of his people to Outland to serve Illidan. Why would he do something like this? Well, it's quite simple. In this expedition, Kel'Thas had found a solution to their growing magic addiction, because without the Sunwell, their race was somewhat doomed. So Illidan offered magic, self-control, and whatever sources of power could be found to save Kel'Thas's people. And one of those sources was the Fel, and Kael drank way too deep of the green juice and fell to the whispers of Kil'jaeden, one of the Lords of the Burning Legion. So after his defeat in Tempest Keep, he returned to Quel'Thalas and he tried to use the Sunwell as a essentially mini Well of Eternity, as a portal to summon in the Burning Legion, specifically to summon in Kil'jaeden. Of course, we went there and we put him down. But this wasn't really putting down a Horde leader, because by that stage, we looked to Lor'themar and Liadrin as the Blood Elves' leaders. But it is another example of Horde storytelling starting with good intentions and ending with a dead leader. Another casualty, funnily enough, of Arthas' invasion of Quel'Thalas was Sylvanas, and that brings us to the modern arc of brutally murdering Horde leaders to make sure that storyline progresses. Okay, it's Pandaria time. Garrosh is war chief. Of course, he tried to forge what he thought was a true alpha horde. He killed Khārn and he invaded Pandaria. But blinded by arrogance, he too went off the deep end. And it wasn't the Alliance who had to put him down, it was the Horde. It was time to inject some honor back into their strength. He was put on trial after his defeat in the Siege of Orgrimmar, but was busted out of prison by Rathian and teleported to alternate universe Draenor, where he got to sort out his daddy issues with Grom and start the Iron Horde. Yeah, the story got a little bit weird at that point in time. But this was just more evil Horde storytelling. Thrall and Garrosh eventually met in a field in Nagrand, where Thrall challenged his once protege to Mak-Garah, and when doing this, Thrall promised to fight in the old way. Yeah, basically, he brought a gun and a few missiles plus a hunter-killer drone to a fist fight. And with that, another Horde leader was put down and the nobility of the Horde was once again restored. But Thrall didn't want his old job again, so that title was given to Vol'jin. You see, Vol'jin's father, Sen'jin, once sacrificed himself to give that group of island trolls a chance to escape and to have a future in the Horde. And soon, it would be Vol'jin's turn to die. Our alternate universe adventure to Draenor ended up with a new version of Gul'dan basically escaping, serving the Burning Legion, and starting a Legion invasion of Azeroth. This invasion was centered on the Broken Shore, a place called the Tomb of Sargeras. So, to deal with the problem, everyone banded together and tried to fight them back. Leading the Horde was Vol'jin, and after not that much fighting, he took a Felguard's blade to the stomach, and while he wasn't immediately killed, he was absolutely succumbing not only to the wound, but also the corruption inherent in being stabbed with such a blade by such a being. And in his death haze, he heard a whisper from the Loa. Of course, the Loa are their gods. And this god told him to make Sylvanas the next war chief. So he did that, and then he died. And suffice it to say, everyone was very confused by this move. It seemed bizarre, but at the time, we didn't know how that story would go. What we saw was another Horde leader dying to do what was right. Because even though he would not be the first person to nominate Sylvanas for anything important, well, one of his gods told him that she was the way to save the Horde, so he did it. He did not realize how wrong he was, because as it turns out, that was actually a Loa called Muzala. Muzala was an agent of the jailer, whispering into Vol'jin's ear, and this was another ploy to subvert the Horde. Sylvanas was now leader, and much like Garrosh, she drove the Horde into another suicidal war. Though at first, she did a great job of rallying the troops. That funeral scene was either an S-tier performance from her, or, quite simply, those writing World of Warcraft, popped too many Zannies and went absolutely mad with their plot. The less we speak of that, the better. Her motivations aside, the Horde quickly realized that she didn't really represent the values that they had fought and died for. And the last bastion of that strength and honor was Varrock Saurfang, the Old Orc. And once again, he stepped up and he challenged Sylvanas to Mak-Garah. There's a lot of people doing Mak-Garahs and, dying. And this was the culmination of noble sacrifice storytelling that began with Grom Hellscream in Warcraft 3. That no matter what, when your back is against the wall, you have to choose to die with honor. That is what Saurfang did. And in doing so, he outed Sylvanas as the Horde-hating monster that she was. In the background, King Rastakhan, another Horde leader, had also died. And it was beginning to feel like Blizzard could only tell a story of the Horde's strength by putting one of their leaders back up against a wall and having them kill themselves in glorious combat. A little bit like watching the TV show Shogun and deciding, I'll take a shot every time someone does seppuku, and then dying before you reach the final episode. Now, currently, it's been a while since a Horde leader has truly died, but when we went to the Shadowlands, it had become rather clear that Blizzard had become the Grim Reaper, knocking at each of their doors until all of the founding leaders of the new Horde were dead, save Thrall. In isolation, these stories are often great. One or two are pretty awful, looking at you, Sylvanas, but broadly speaking, there's a lot of good stuff here. But people began to become detached from the Horde, and there was another problem. The Alliance didn't seem to get this. While us Alliance mains may have thought that we got some pretty lukewarm, boring stories and that the Horde got all the cool stuff, it's undoubtedly the case that the Horde stories really did begin to repeat, that Blizzard just kept on killing Horde leaders. We went to the depth of that today, but if you want a broader view of the failures in Horde storytelling, you'll need to check out this video on why the modern Horde somewhat sucks and then how players have noticed. As we move into Midnight, it certainly looks that Lor'themar is looking pretty badass. Certainly also looks like his back is up against the wall. But you know what? I think Blizzard are self-aware enough to not go and kill him. I think they do want to develop faction narratives more. We've been told that will happen in this expansion. If you ask me, it's about time that the Alliance started having some of those struggles too. If you want to learn more about why the Horde sort of began to suck and how players have noticed, watch this video next.